Welcome back to the Skid Factory, episode 4 of the Poor Man's Ferrari. It's coming along quite well. Today I'm heading down to see Steve at Maroochy Cylinder Heads. We've got to skin the head, we've got to cut some valve seats, we've got to grind some valves, we've got to reassemble it all with our Kelford Cam package, Kelford Springs and Kelford Cams. Before we begin, I've got myself this whole saw shirt, fine and dandy. You can get yourself one too, www.theskidfactory.com. We've also got some Fairlane shirts and stuff there too. Limited edition shirts. Are they limited edition? No, they're limited edition, eh?
They are until they run out, and then they're...
We're not going to do them again? We might do them again.
Maybe.
Maybe. Depends
Maybe for Christmas.
Depends how popular they are.
Yep.
Anyway, let's go down and see Steve and get this head serviced.
Steve has been in the engine machining game for 35 years. Servicing cylinder heads is the bread and butter of the business, but they also do cylinder boring and engine assembly. The 20 valve head is mounted in the seat cutting machine and Steve gets to work recutting the valve seats. The seat faces and tips of the valves are then recut. The valves are then dropped into the head and each port is vacuum tested to confirm there is a good mechanical seal. The head gasket mating surface is given a light skim to finish off the machining part of the head service. After a final dunk in the dishwasher, Steve refits the valves to the head and installs a new set of valve stem seals. The Kelford Cams require matching valve springs. These are fitted along with the standard Toyota retainers and collets. A bench-mounted valve spring compressor and special collet tool are used to reassemble the valve train. On cylinder heads such as the 20 valve that use very light valves and springs, a handheld spring compressor can also be used. A Yamaha service tool works well on the 20 valve head, which is no surprise given the similarities between the Toyota head and the Yamaha motorbike heads. A final vac test is performed to confirm valve sealing.
Smile, mate.
Oh, geez, you don't want to show me that.
Come on, give me a wave. Sweet as.
We're back in the shed, back from Maroochy Cylinder Heads. Huge thanks to Steve down there, not only for getting the job done, but also showing me the process, showing me how the machines work and what's involved in getting your head serviced. If you're like me and you worked at a dealership, this is the kind of job that you do just throw into a box and send to the head shop. They service the head, they set the valve clearance, and you get back a complete package ready to bolt back on a car. So it was really cool to see the process involved. Now I've got the tedious task of setting up the valve clearances. This is a job that Steve was going to do for us, but I volunteered because I wanted to show you guys what's involved in the process. So here's our Kelford cams. These are a 194B set of cams. These are a direct replacement for your standard cams for a slightly modified 4AGE. It still retains the variable valve timing. Basically because Steve has recut the valve seats and ground the valves, it's going to be, the clearance is going to be different. He did tip the ends of the valves ever so slightly to account for that, so it might end up, the valve clearance might end up being okay on some of them, but we have to check it anyway. So the 4AGE, the 20 valve at least, I'm not too sure about the 16 valves, they use a shim under bucket adjustment. So that there is our valve clearance adjustment. It's kind of a set and forget kind of thing. And basically to adjust the valve clearance, you've got to remove the cam, you've got to replace this shim. So the shim goes on, bucket goes on, bolt the cam in, measure our valve clearance with a set of feeler gauges, write it all down. I've then got to do some maths and find out the correct shim sizes that I need. The tricky, well not so tricky, but measuring the shim itself, the micrometer doesn't actually sit inside the shim. So I've got a ball bearing that's 4mm that I don't drop on the ground, drop into the shim, and then I can then measure that, take away the 4mm, that gives me the shim size. So do some measuring, bolt the cams in, do some measuring, do some maths. I'm going to lose this ball bearing, you watch. Pick up the phone, call our mates at Golby's who can then order us the correct size shims. I can then replace them all, bolt the cams in for good, bolt the head on, and then one step closer to having a running poor man's Ferrari.
Starting on the exhaust side, Woody installs the shims, buckets, cam and caps, and then torques them to spec. Using feeler gauges, the clearance of each valve is checked and noted on Woody's Beerbox notepad. A 4mm ball bearing is used to allow the shims to be measured correctly. The shim measurements are then scratched into Woody's stone tablet. The process is repeated for each bucket. Some quick math is performed and then etched onto the Dead Sea Scroll. This determines the required shim size. 2 + 2 = 4, minus 1, that is 3. Expeditious arithmetic.
So exhaust cam went in, checked the valve clearance, pulled the cam back out, pulled each and every bucket and each shim out and measured them separately with our little ball bearing. I did end up losing that, but I found it again. So I wrote it all down on a bit of cardboard, but Alan wasn't happy with that because it's like we're measuring like precise things here, and
I've seen more legible stuff on the side of caves, bro.
truth. So I got onto a notepad and separated everything. So we've got our current valve clearance, our current shim, the difference between the two, which we can then do a calculation and then figure out the shim required. And what we found is we can actually swap around a few shims on a few different valves to get the correct valve clearance. So the next step is to bolt the inlet cam in, do all the inlet valves, figure everything out. I can then most likely swap around some more shims, but I'm still going to have to pick up the phone and call Golby's to get some more shims because there's no way that there's going to be right. So inlet cam in, do all that, and I'll get back to you. Bolted in the intake cam, checked the valve clearance, and 6 out of the 12 shims were bang on. So there's actually a couple of shims which I can then swap over to the exhaust side, and then some of the exhaust shims I can swap over to the intake side. Now I'm about to install the head gasket, bolt the head on, and install some shims. I've got a bag full of these little tiny metal things which are really easy to lose. So shims in, buckets in, cams on, oil pump, front cover, timing cover, all that kind of stuff's going to go on, and get this engine reassembled, and then sooner or later back into the car. Let's get it done.
After a final check for stray 8 balls, Woody mates the cylinder head to the block. Standard Toyota head bolts are used. These are torqued to a base setting and then tightened a further 180 degrees in 2 stages. The lifter buckets and correctly sized shims are fitted, followed by the new Kelford Cams. A final check of the valve clearances is performed to ensure no mix-ups. Woody installs the cam seals, plug tube seals and valve cover gasket to complete the top end assembly. The new blacktop oil pump is pulled apart to perform some basic oil gallery mods. Woody uses a die grinder to radius the oil gallery corners. This improves the oil flow in and out of the pump gears. The windage tray, oil pickup and sump pan are all fitted to seal up the bottom end of the engine. The cam and crank pulleys are fitted along with a genuine Toyota timing belt and tensioner. Fitting the individual throttle bodies and other bolt-ons concludes the engine assembly. Woody's got the 20 valve back together and it's looking pretty good really. You can't not love those trumpets. I reckon it's going to sound pretty good. We've still got a lot of work to do though. Obviously the engine needs to be in the car for it to work. We also need wires and we've got some wires but they're pretty ugly, so we're going to go with new ones. We've got a bunch of coils and stuff to go in. Make some brackets, do some things. Lots to do. And that'll be next time. Thanks for watching.
Insert Duff Man theme song. Oh yeah.